Drama, divide, chaos, a lot more drama too. Those are the best words to describe this entire situation with CM Punk backstage in AEW. With the best in the world having returned for the first time in nearly a year due to injury and those backstage issues with a big debut episode of AEW Collision, let's look back at all of the issues that unfolded and led to this. It's a complicated situation, but we're going to do our best to iron out all of the details in the simplest way possible. And yes, if you have an opinion about it, we can hear from you in the comments below. CM Punk's anticipated return to pro wrestling was on the debut episode of AEW Rampage in August of 2021 in his hometown of the United Center and in front of a sold-out, anticipated audience. He wasn't even advertised and sold out an arena in a major American city. AEW had a legitimate star power in their ranks, one that fans had wanted, and met that demand with some huge numbers. This was the first time that Punk was back in wrestling after a 7-year absence, and he made an immediate impact. Tony Khan, as much as himself, stating that Punk was the one big star they were seeking out to add to the company, and he made a big difference in pay-per-view and live event revenue. For the first several months, this honeymoon was rather smooth, but the core issues were all behind Punk's former friend, Colt Cabana, who wasn't directly involved, but was involved in name only with all these eventual issues that would come up. But his treatment behind the scenes is the source of resentment and a whole lot of debate. To keep you up to speed, CM Punk and Colt Cabana were best friends, coming up in the Illinois independent wrestling scene, eventually breaking big in Ring of Honor and winning tag team gold there together. Years later, after CM Punk made his very unceremonious exit from WWE, he appeared on Colt Cabana's influential Art of Wrestling podcast and laid into WWE for all the reasons why he walked out on the company. He berated, by name specifically, WWE Dr. Chris Amon. This led to legal action from Dr. Chris Amon, not WWE, though some have said that they were involved, but that's speculative. And this laid into a whole defamation lawsuit against not just Punk, but also Cabana. In June of 2018, CM Punk and Colt Cabana won the defamation lawsuit held against them by the former WWE doctor. Some on one side stated that CM Punk reassured Colt Cabana that he would cover these legal fees, and both men entered into a legal battle against Amon under that circumstance, depending on who you talk to. Punk eventually stopped paying the fees, and Cabana countersued him, so it was another legal issue. It led to an ugly falling out between the two men who were once very close friends, and it became a very public and legal matter, which eventually was settled out of court. So how does this fit into the backstage drama with AEW? For one, Cabana was not only signed to All Elite Wrestling in 2021 when Punk debuted, but he was a part of the Dark Order faction. He was quietly moved to Ring of Honor, another promotion under the AEW banner, without any real explanation, and many backstage assumed that CM Punk was responsible for making Tony Khan shift Cabana to ROH. Well, we can't confirm that, and reports emerged that Punk was behind the entire thing, or someone was telling these people reporting it that was the case, but Tony Khan, president of AEW, and CM Punk have both vehemently denied this multiple times publicly. More on that later. Let's jump all the way to May of 2022 when CM Punk stepped up to challenge Adam Hangman Page for the AEW World Championship. Hangman was one of the heart and souls of AEW in the elite faction that got the entire thing going and was a sentimental favorite to some in all of AEW fandom. During the feud, Hangman made an effort to go off script with the comment stating, "You talk a big game about workers' rights, but you've shown the exact opposite when you came here." The look on CM Punk's face when this was said made it clear that this was a shot against him, not just as a wrestling performer, but him as some type of politician backstage. And he believed it was in reference to him putting Colt Cabana on a blacklist of sorts. And Punk eventually defeated Hangman to become the AEW World Champion at the Double or Nothing pay-per-view. But this was only a start to the drama, because in that match, CM Punk has alluded that Hangman was, quote, physically shooting on him, chopping him in the face, and at one point making the match feel like a, quote, garbage match because CM Punk was worried about whether or not he was physically going to get into a legitimate fight with Hangman during a big pay-per-view title match. And then on top of this entire situation gets complicated with Punk's misfortune with injuries. It would happen only 5 days after he won the championship when he jumped into the crowd and injured his foot, forcing him to take time away. Instead of vacating the AEW World title, it was revealed that an interim champion would be crowned, and that champion would be AEW's most reliable star during this period, Jon Moxley. Some time passed, and Moxley defeated the living legend Hiroshi Tanahashi at the well-received Forbidden Door pay-per-view in a spot that was, in the eyes of many, meant for CM Punk once again in Chicago at the United Center. But it was one of the many instances that made fans realize why Moxley was really an MVP for AEW. By August of 2022, Punk made his return to AEW TV, but the cracks underneath the surface kept getting bigger. Ahead of Punk's return, Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter confirmed that the Punk Cabana issue had made another wave within AEW and made some resentful towards Punk, but admitted that everybody had a different story. And what would have been a rather unfortunate foreshadowing of events, Meltzer stated, "It feels like a number of people are close to their breaking point if things don't get settled." CM Punk threw gasoline on the fire on the August 17th episode of AEW Dynamite when he laid his AEW World title belt on the mat and called out Adam Hangman Page for a rematch in an open challenge. This was in the eyes of many an unscripted moment, and in hindsight, even more apparent to AEW insiders like Tony Schiavone and Jim Ross on commentary, who were clearly puzzled, saying that they even weren't sure if Punk was fully cleared to compete. So CM Punk was back to settle this whole real world champion, interim world champion issue, but was calling out Adam Hangman Page, who wasn't even in the building. Yeah, it gets confusing. Punk hit another nail on the whole problem when he said that, quote, "That's not cowboy shit, that's coward shit." And it seemed like he had gone into business for himself, depending on who you talk to, which is perhaps the way of getting back at Hangman for his comments against him 3 months earlier before they had the Double or Nothing match. Yeah, I know, this is getting weird. Punk continued the parade of pipe bombs here with lighthearted shots at the Hangman and eventually went face-to-face with the interim AEW World Champion Jon Moxley by calling him, quote, "the third best member of his group," which many thought was a reference to The Shield. Punk then took big shots at Eddie Kingston, who wasn't even backstage at the show, by saying he was the, quote, "third best Eddie he wrestled," referencing Eddie Guerrero, and the second best Kingston he shared a locker room with, Kofi Kingston. He ended the big, much-quoted promo by saying that Jon Moxley wouldn't even be the first John he beat in Chicago for a world title. John Cena. As you may have realized, that was a throwback to the big match they had at Money in the Bank 2011, an all-time great. Although Punk lost to Jon Moxley in a surprising 3-minute squash on the August 24th episode of Dynamite, his friend and AEW producer Ace Steel motivated him to go right back at it, and at All Out in Chicago, Punk beat Moxley to regain the AEW World Championship. But that's where things exploded. CM Punk injured his tricep during the match, and then entered the post-show media scrum in what would be one of the wildest scenes of the wrestling year in 2022. The biggest drama in wrestling in some time, played out on a microphone and then played out backstage. The headlines were not about MJF making his big return or CM Punk winning back the title. No, it was about what happened after the show. Where do we even begin on this one? Remember that tiny little Colt Cabana situation we told you about earlier? Punk decided that enough was enough, and probably because he felt he was being villainized in this entire situation, the whole story exploded to another level and decided to give his own account and his own specific perspective of everything that played out. Punk revealed that his relationship with Cabana had ended long before anyone thought it did, and that he had every receipt to prove that he wasn't in the wrong. I have every receipt. I have every invoice. I have every email. I have the email where he says, and I quote, "I agree to go our separate ways, and I will get my own lawyer, and you do not have to pay anymore." And I'm quoting Punk in this circumstance from that big press conference. With Tony Khan sitting right by him, Punk decided then to start unloading on the Elite. He then moved on to Hangman Page's workers' rights promo you heard about earlier 3 months prior, where he asked what did he deserve to have a, quote, empty-headed effing dumb F like Hangman Page to, quote, go into business for himself. He then laid out his attack on the other people he directly referred to as executive vice presidents, meaning Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. He stated that while he understood them wanting to stick up for their friends, Colt Cabana in this case, he felt like it was none of their business and accused Hangman Page of trying to jeopardize AEW's first $1 million house with this entire situation. To sum all of this basically up, Punk publicly accused the Elite, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, and maybe even Hangman Page, of spreading rumors that he got Cabana kicked out of AEW's television main roster. Yeah, that's all very assumptive and very speculative, and we want to make that clear. And this is what led to the locker room physical confrontation where Punk allegedly got into a fist fight with the Young Bucks while Ace Steel, his friend and AEW promoter, was by his side. Punk's longtime friend was there for him, while Kenny Omega had his arm bit somehow, a mark that was visible during a later chat with Camcom TV. Yeah, it was a messy situation. AEW producers that we're not even naming here were involved. Legal people were on hand. It was a messy situation, but the police were never reportedly called into this. Yeah, there were a lot of people outside of the inner circle that were involved, and a lot of different conflicting reports about who exactly those people were, including the head of AEW's legal department, depending on who you talk to. Yeah, we keep bringing that up. Yes, a fist fight with the then AEW injured world champion and 3 of the executive vice presidents reportedly, and I mean widely reportedly, unfolded right after one of their biggest pay-per-views of the year. It was not a nice situation. There's also widespread reports about Chris Jericho, one of AEW's originals, allegedly calling CM Punk, quote, a locker room cancer to his face while all of this unfolded. As you could imagine, the Brawl Out at All Out was the talk of the wrestling world, but what should have been the talk of the wrestling world was MJF, and he was already in some type of reported dispute with AEW and their president, Tony Khan, over pay or compensation or recognition. And that was finally settled, only for it to be completely downplayed by all of these other issues with other big-name players in the company. Oh, and need we remind you that Punk tore that left tricep against Jon Moxley in this pay-per-view main event? Yeah, it left everyone with a messy situation with multiple big-name players not being able to carry on their championship titles, and Tony Khan was left with a lot of flack about how to handle it. But in the immediate aftermath, there needed to be one gigantic band-aid to do some damage control. Hangman Page was the quickest to return as he was in the World Title Tournament, but the Elite trio of the Young Bucks and Omega only returned 2 months after the Brawl Out in November of 2022, and many believed that they were serving some type of suspension during that time. They were stripped of the AEW Trios tag team titles. Things got back on track for AEW, understandably choosing to prioritize a focus on the superstars who didn't have any of these issues going for them. Yeah, let's get back to the people we know who won't be fighting back in the locker room. As the months passed, there were varying reports on the situation, with some stating that Punk seemed to be looking for a way out of his AEW contract, and others stating that talks had begun to smooth over between Punk and Tony Khan. It was well into 2023 when more defined rumors emerged of Punk and AEW president Tony Khan reaching some type of agreement for his return. At the same time, there was expectations for AEW to launch a new branded weekly TV show with their partners in media, Warner Brothers Discovery, called AEW Collision, to revolve around CM Punk and FTR, a tag team that had long been aligned with Punk during all of these issues backstage, while Dynamite would be more centered around members of the Elite. It's also worth noting on the debut episode of AEW Collision, while this was happening, Punk was always going to be on the shelf anyway because of the surgery. But by May 31st, he was fully recovered by most estimations, and AEW president Tony Khan officially announced that CM Punk would be featured on this debut episode of Collision in the main event alongside FTR. In Chicago at the United Center that this humble voice was present for, FTR's Dax Harwood said that AEW is not about Collision versus Dynamite, but simply AEW. And June 17th, 2023 came around with the debut episode of Collision, and surely enough, Punk was gonna have to address what was brewing after the 9 months of him on the shelf after the brawlout with the injury and all of the rumor and speculation. He briefly addressed the Elite in his promo by indirectly saying, quote, "You know, David Zaslav, the head of Warner Brothers Discovery, calls me One Bill Phil. That's because I'm the true, genuine article in a business of counterfeit bucks." Ouch. He also added that he was only sorry to certain fans about the fact that the only people softer than him are their favorite wrestlers. Double ouch. In response, the Young Bucks wrote on their Twitter bio that if it were 2018, back when they would get into all these internet fights, they would have had a counterfeit Bucks t-shirt ready for sale on Pro Wrestling Tees. Yeah, all that money has been left on the table. CM Punk had a successful outing in his return with the FTR at his side, defeating his longtime rival Samoa Joe, along with Bullet Club Gold's Jay White and Juice Robinson. But everybody was waiting to hear what he had to say after that. Outside of the on-screen pot shots on Collision, what Punk really had to say seemed more genuine in his ESPN interview. For one, he apologized to AEW president Tony Khan for putting him in a tough position and stated his overall frustration and injury for making him seem a lot more frustrated, and to say that the controversial all-out media scrum was just not the way he should have gone about things. He admitted that he handled it in the wrong way and said that he tried to reach out to Kenny Omega and the Bucks after the incident, and he received a legal notice telling him not to contact them. This means only one thing, that the hard feelings have not been made peaceful just yet, that both sides on the issue have not mended this broken bridge within AEW. Still, Punk showed a willingness to get on the same page, and the entire issue from last year has still not resolved itself. Even Chris Jericho, who chose the Bucks side initially publicly, has previously said that he always enjoyed working with Punk. So that's where things stand right now. Is there peace between the CM Punk camp and the Elite camp? It's not exactly clear, and the reasons behind it are a lot more splintered and fractured than we may even understand based on what we know. Though there has been much speculation about the current AEW TV deal and how CM Punk plays into it and whether or not it's worth $1 billion deals over 5 years, One thing is true. CM Punk is back in AEW. The big names we also talked about, Kenny Omega and AEW, they are also in AEW for the foreseeable future. So all we know is just the speculation that piles up. How is this all going to play out? Will CM Punk and the Elite get along while AEW is still trying to progress into a new long-term TV deal with Warner Brothers Discovery, which some people have speculated is worth more than $1 billion, but there are conflicting reports on that. And Tony Khan understands that CM Punk and the Elite getting along could be a part of what makes Warner Brothers want to be in the AEW business for the long term, especially if everyone wants to keep making money. If you want to see a history of CM Punk's backstage issues, check out our video on 8 times CM Punk had real-life heat with other wrestlers. And don't forget to subscribe to Sportskeeda Wrestling. Hit that like button, get into the comments below.